Hello, it's been a while. I was doom scrolling on Instagram recently, and I came across, at first glance, a pretty interesting Instagram account by the name of Lazy Izdihar. And as the Russian proverb goes, and it got worse. I originally took her to be a YouTube historian with an interest in Soviet society, fashion, and the people, which is pretty neat. I totally agree with humanizing the misunderstood stories of history unless they're French. After all, my forte I would consider to be Rhodesian history. Does that make me a racist? The content is automatically questionable if you watch a few videos. However, after digging a little deeper, I found this gem on her YouTube channel. I don't want that video to be the focus of this one, but if you are interested, just know that the first reference that she uses in the video to designate kulaks is a Soviet source. Just go and watch the video to see what you think. I don't really want to focus on long-form content, so I'm going to give you some examples on Instagram and her YouTube community comments of the misinformation and at times just outright lies about the Soviet Union.
What would I wear to the Nuremberg trials? Now, obviously, I know you're trying to be mean to me here and make fun of me, but it's actually a topic worth addressing, as we live in a time with an ongoing genocide where too many people are quiet or complicit. So this is certainly a historical event that is actually worth addressing right now. And to have fun with it, what would I wear? Firstly, it's important to mention that the Nuremberg trials were a Soviet idea. In fact, Churchill and Roosevelt had tried to convince Stalin to simply go along with their plan of just executing a little over 2,000 Nazis to satisfy the public, instead of the extensive international trial, which Stalin had been calling for since 1942, as the Soviets had already begun trying high-profile Nazis well before any other country.
Okay, so Churchill and Roosevelt didn't try to convince Stalin to kill 2,000 Nazis, although that would have been based. I can't find any evidence that they ever told Stalin that, and this document doesn't actually have anything to do with her argument. What did happen is that Stalin made a quote-unquote joke to Churchill and Roosevelt that 50,000 SS should be shot on the spot. Not saying this is a bad thing, by the way. Churchill denounced the quote-unquote cold-blooded execution of soldiers who had fought for their country. Oh, Stalin, you're such a joker. It's a shame that you killed almost as many Soviet soldiers in your purges as you did German POWs, indirectly leading to the deaths of millions of your subjects due to military mismanagement. While the Soviets were the ones who pushed for trials the hardest, they didn't start the process. Documentation and calling for persecution of Nazi war crimes was started by Poland in 1939, while the Soviet Union was in a military and economic alliance with Nazi Germany. It's interesting that their attitudes toward the Nazis changed once they were the ones being murdered in the hundreds of thousands, and not just the Polish thorn in the communist side.
Now, who would I be testifying against? Well, unfortunately, my own ancestors. You see, I'm Donib Swabian, a German minority from former Yugoslavia and Romania. My family being from various villages in the Banat on the Romanian side and a couple on the Serbian side. And while many Donib Swabians in the West claim to be victims of communism, the reality is these villages and communities were huge collaborators with the Nazis, very sympathetic to Hitler's idea of the Volksdeutsch. And they were very famously tried in their own section of the Nuremberg trials, as my people made up the biggest volunteer SS unit, the Prinz Eugen Mountain Division, responsible for particularly heinous war crimes in Montenegro. Yay! And while collective punishment isn't always the correct course of action, after the immense amount of pain that they were responsible for, those entire communities were punished. Most disappointing for me is that in all of my research, I can't find a single partisan of Donib Swabian ancestry. So when I look back and I study my own history, and when I find my inspiration through brave communists who fought against Nazism, putting myself in their shoes, I would hope to have been better than my people. I would have been a partisan, and I probably would have testified against my people. And in context to today, we should stand against genocide, stand against being complicit, in the suffering of others. And so my cute little anti-fascist outfits, very much inspired by the Soviets, who won the war in Europe for us, I'm simply not going to entertain the idea that I should be ashamed or made fun of for this. Śmierć fascism.
It's also funny that she basically justifies collective punishment against collaboration communities, her own ancestors I may add, while rallying against the genocide in Gaza. While I do admire her recognition of our ancestors' woes, this is just phrased in a weird way. Also, there were Danube-Swabian partisans. She's not really lying, it's just bad research or the blatant omission of easily found knowledge in order to make herself look morally righteous. If I was alive back then, I would have been the base partisan Chad who killed 1 million Nazis and testified against my war criminal dad. Look how moral I am!
I'm going to refrain from saying too much or sharing too many of my thoughts until a later time as things play out. Ultimately, I am for an independent Donbas region.
Why am I not surprised at this point in the video that she supports an independent Donbas region? Make no mistake, the supposed genocide in Donbas never happened. To put it into perspective, 25 civilians died from both sides in 2021. It's simply just Russian propaganda. There is undeniable proof of Russian meddling in the events leading up to and in the war itself. For example, Igor Strelkov, Russian operative and war criminal, admitted to starting the war. If someone says they're for the independence of the Donbas, they're either painfully uninformed or a Putin simp. And she says all this with a Transnistrian flag in the background where a very similar thing occurred in Moldova in the 1990s. On the 27th of February 2022, after a bit of Soviet flag waving a few posts prior, she finally makes a video addressing the war. Not denouncing a senseless attack on another country for no reason, but criticizing the Ukrainian National Guard for putting lard on their bullets when fighting Muslim soldiers, specifically the Chechen Kadyrovites. I think that's all I need to say on that. Personally, I think I'm on the side of the guys that don't summarily execute their own soldiers for giving away their positions to drones and don't behead prisoners of war and put their heads on pikes. As a campaigner for the crisis in Gaza, you should know better, and I really think that you do. Now let's look at some YouTube community posts, which really aren't any better. Wow, Stalin, that's so nice of you. It's a shame that you ordered the expulsion of Muslim Tartars from Crimea and caused in excess deaths of 30 to almost 200,000 people. It's a shame that under your leadership, thousands of mosques were closed in the USSR. It's a real shame that the Soviets persecuted not only Muslims in the Soviet Union, but in their imperialist exploits of countries like Iran and Afghanistan. The logic is the same as calling a Churchill a fascist due to him being quote-unquote charmed by Mussolini in 1927 and continuing to call him a fascist after the British had destroyed the Italian fleet at Taranto and the war in Africa and Italy itself. Compared to actions, words are just that, words. I genuinely have no words for someone taking words spoken by Joseph Stalin and taking them as gospel compared to his actions as leader of the Soviet Union. But according to this quote, Stalin loved Muslims. It's all the evidence you need. According to the text, apparently Sharia is the common law of the Soviet Union, which is a blatant lie. Muslim teachings in school, laws, and punishment were banned in the Soviet Union. And I quote, "Sadly, I can never post this one without a handful of men, be them Islamophobes or those who desperately need to prove they know more than me, butting in with every little detail I might have missed or trying to prove Stalin hated Muslims. Man, it's annoying." Yes, the Islamophobes who are literally against whitewashing cultural genocide against the Muslim religion. How Islamophobic. A few posts below this, she shares a now taken down video on the reopening, I strain the word reopening, of the Leningrad Mosque in 1956, which was closed by the Soviets in 1940. Wow, I wonder what potential events allowed for the reopening of this mosque. It really makes you think. Note how she uses the word opened instead of reopened. If you didn't know anything about the Leningrad Mosque before reading this and didn't do any research afterwards, you could easily gain the impression that a brand new building was being opened. No, this was a building that had been closed and had been reopened after Stalin's death. It's not lies, it's just manipulation of the truth. And I quote, "The Constitution of the USSR is moral assistance and real support for all those who are now leading the struggle against fascist barbarism." I guess there was an amendment to the Soviet Constitution that allowed for cooperation with the Nazis in invading and dissolving sovereign states like Poland, Bessarabia, and the Baltics, and stood silent when the Slavic Yugoslavia was divided by the Nazis. I want to close this up with a picture here. This is Lady Izdihar posing cheerfully with a part of the Berlin Wall, the epitome of this failed ideology. People died trying to get over this structure, put up to keep a population of a city of an ideology imprisoned. The Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain was put up after 3 million people fled Soviet-occupied Germany. 3 million people. That is not the sign of a popular and or successful ideology. At the end of the day, Lady Izdihar is just your average generic tanky. She lives a seemingly comfortable life in the first world capitalist Western country and uses that privilege to campaign for a dead ideology which has been tried and has failed countless times over the past century. Will she ever go to Russia and join Putin's war on his Slavic neighbors? Probably not. Will she ever go to Gaza and pick up a rifle with what's left of Hamas? Probably not. Will she even organize a strike to better the people around her? Probably not. She's no better from all these other left-leaning creators. All really annoying and quite ignorant talk, yet no actual walk. After all, it's easier to play dress up than actually go and get your hands dirty.